Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Patchwork Revival podcast. This is the podcast that celebrates the generational connection we find through quilting. I am here today with my friend Bree.
Hello.
Bree was a guest on episode 3, and in that episode we talked all about your quilting history, who you are, what you love to do, how you learned to sew, and what you do now.
Yes.
And since that time, Bree has been involved in trying to develop some sewing classes and instructional techniques to try to help beginner sewers, people interested in sewing who maybe don't really know how to get started or where to start, learn how to sew. And Bree, you have been sewing for...
oh my gosh, like 3 or 4 years now.
3 or 4 years now. So I feel as though you can probably still remember what it was like to be like, I want to sew. Now what?
Yes.
I think a lot of us who have been sewing or quilting for a really long time, I don't really remember so much how I learned. I don't remember what order I learned in. I also feel totally overwhelmed when somebody is like, oh my gosh, I would love to make a quilt.
Yes.
Can you show me how? And in my mind, I'm like, of course I can show you how. And then I'm like, where do I start?
Exactly. Yes.
So hopefully you can help us kind of learn how to tackle that or think about how we can start to learn how to teach others. Obviously, people have different learning styles, different things they want to learn, but I think it's a great thing to think about and consider because most of us kind of appreciate and understand that quilting and sewing in general is sort of an art that's been passed down almost like through oral history over time. And then obviously now we have YouTube and instructional classes in person or online or however you want to do it. But
which is how I learned. YouTube University.
yeah, so many people love YouTube. There's so many great sources out there, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And I still have tons of people come and tell me how much they want to learn how to quilt. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I could go on for years about this. So let's just say somebody comes up to us and is like, hey, I want to learn how to make something like this. Okay, let's hold this up because Bree made this little strawberry. It was inspired by a project on Instagram.
Yes.
Got some scraps from a friend online. Isn't that cool?
Did. Scrappy Happy Strawberry.
Isn't it cute?
The cutest patchwork. I love it.
So someone's like, I want to make that. It's not a huge quilted project, but it's definitely a full-on like quilt.
Yes.
So what do you think?
Okay, my first question would be do you know how to sew? Can you sew a straight line?
Let's just say no. Somebody's like,
Okay.
no, I can't even do that.
All right, well, we got to start with the basics then. Let me teach you how to sew. And I have had people, come to me asking about quilting or where to start sewing. And before I put together a sewing class, I had a hard time telling them, where to start because I had a hard start. I pretty much taught myself how to sew, and I would look for projects in thrifted books. And that turned out to be pretty difficult. I kind of would just try to sew something without knowing if I was going to be able to actually finish it. So lots of unfinished projects when I first started sewing. Now that I, have some years under my belt, I think I have a pretty good idea on how to show someone else how to sew and where to start.
Yeah.
And, I think that you've got to start with the absolute basics. You've got to learn essential sewing skills, like how to sew a straight line, how to backstitch, how to pivot. Once you can do that,
you can do mostly anything.
Mostly anything.
Yeah. And it's great, I think, also to just remember that no sewing project ever will be perfect. So even when you're teaching someone, you do not have to teach in a perfect way so that they're going to have a perfect finished product, but it should be good enough that they feel like, oh yeah, I could do that and I can improve on it.
My objective for the class was to leave with a finished product.
Okay.
And everyone did leave with a finished tote bag.
Perfect. So, what would you start? Do you think that people should figure out, like, do you have a sewing machine? Do you not have a sewing machine? Do you need one? Can you borrow one? Should you go to a formal class, or could I just have you come over and I'll teach you? Or what do you think?
Okay, that's a tough one. I think that if you have a machine at home already, it's best to learn on that one. If you're intimidated by the machine that you have at home, I think that you should send me a message and we can work on something together. I can teach you how to sew on the machine that you already own, because that's the best one for you. But if not, I would recommend, finding an authorized dealer in your area and buy a machine through them. Most of the time you can, what's the word? I'm at a loss for words right now.
A lot of times they'll do like an introductory tour almost of like, this is how you wind a bobbin. This is how you load it. This is how you thread it. And that's really all you need to get started.
Exactly. And if you're buying a machine through an authorized dealer, it's going to come with warranty. You can always call them for questions. So that's your first stop if you want to learn how to sew, is buy a good machine, one that you can afford.
Yeah, the best one that you can afford. Yeah, and a lot of dealers, I feel like, will have a whole range of like, yes, you can buy this long arm for $30,000 or this little doodad for
this absolute beginner mechanical machine. Doesn't have to be computerized.
Yes.
I invested in a mid-entry level computerized machine through my authorized dealer here in San Angelo.
Yeah.
To get my students started. And it was great. I do not regret that one bit. We had minimal threading issues.
Perfect.
We were able to adjust the speed on the machine, so it worked out great.
Yeah. Both of us love old and vintage kind of stuff. And actually, you can go online and just Google the model of any machine, and like almost every single time you will find a manual, like a PDF, at least a scanned version of a manual. So that could work, but if it's like on Marketplace or dropped at a thrift or something, you don't really know what condition it's going to be in. You're still going to have to invest in like probably having it looked at and repaired or oiled or something by like a...
I would save yourself the trouble and skip buying a used machine from a thrift store or something, especially if you don't already know how to sew, because you're going to have a hard time threading it, troubleshooting the machine, or your threading issues, and the machine may not even work properly. So I would avoid that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like it's almost like, unless you are a mechanic or you have an interest in learning the mechanics of like something of that sort, just go buy an affordable new vehicle instead of like one from somebody's garage off the side of the road that
I agree.
You just don't know what you're doing. So, okay, we agree on that. So we could probably guide people, or here's a thought too. Let's say it was like just one person approached you. They didn't really have a machine. You were like, well, this is the kind of machine I have. A lot of the same brands have similar sort of threading or bobbins or things like that. So maybe you could at least be like, I'm happy to let you come over and use it. And then you can kind of see if that might be something you wanted to invest in. Maybe. But I feel like someone who's interested in sewing and or quilting, a good machine, worth its weight in gold.
Yes.
Worth the investment.
Yes, it
so
really
we'll
is.
encourage people that way. Yes. And I love your suggestion. Go to your local dealer, because they're going to have so many resources for you.
They really are. They're going to tell you, which is going to be the best option for you.
Yeah, just knowing what you want to do.
Yes.
Sometimes they have really killer deals.
They really do. I got a killer deal on the machines that I bought for my classes. Yeah. I happened to buy them all on sale. So
perfect. Yeah. Okay, so let's just walk through what comes next. So it's like, okay, I have my machine. I thread it. I'm ready to sew. Now you have to do fabric. So
yes. So I think any sort of quilting cotton is an excellent beginner fabric It's easy to work with. You're not having to worry about, the stretchiness of the fabric or how thin it is. Usually you can just start sewing at the tension that your machine's already set at.
With the needle, usually that it already has on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's some things that I think I can't get too caught up in because I'm like, I'm pretty sure I never really thought about the needle on my machine
Yes.
for like years.
Right.
And much less like changed it. I was like afraid to change my machine needle.
Yes.
So that might be something, I don't know. I feel like if I were to just start teaching people, I would just totally overwhelm them by like trying to give them too much information at once.
So, I told my students that I sew with a variety of needles, and you will definitely need a variety once you get used to sewing and start working on different projects. I had a little graphic that I printed out from Wawak.
I guess so. I've heard of them. They sell a lot of bag making supplies.
They do. So
Am I
get
of that?
a lot of my bag making supplies from them. They had a nice little graphic talking about different needles, and that's just an easy way to, show your students that there's different types for different projects. Look over this and then figure out what you want to use.
Awesome. We should link that just to kind of show people. I mean, there's so many resources out there, and you got to pick what you like. But
There really are.
That one's really good. I should probably read that. I should refer to that.
I'll leave it for you.
Yeah. So that's also another point, right? Like, we're always learning. So cool.
Yeah.
That's so good. Okay. So how do you, I think personally, I agree with you. Obviously, I'm biased because I like to quilt, and I would probably be doing like some sort of quilted project or like your beginner tote pattern that you have. It's called the Texas size tote pattern. We have some examples here. Mine is sitting on this back shelf. I did a quilted version because that's just who I am. And then
this tote is so you.
I know, it really is. And then there's where's the other one?
Oh, it's right
we
here.
have so you have one. It's
I have
designed
a modified
to be
version.
Yeah, it's like a reversible, just sort of basic tote, but you kind of can adjust the straps if you want. You can put a pocket if you want.
I've made some modifications to this one right here.
But the base tote pattern is like it's a lined tote that you can reverse. It's reversible. So really, you kind of just learn in the pattern straight stitching, some top stitching,
back stitch, how to pivot and make boxed corners.
Yes, and like line things up. You do a really great job in that pattern of
how to make fabric straps, how to use webbing for straps.
Yeah,
So,
it's a great. I'm going to link the pattern in the show notes. Where can they find it if they're interested?
They can find it at InBloomSewingStudio.com.
Yep, InBloomSewingStudio.com. There are a lot of versions on Instagram. They're so cute. And I think I'm going to make one that's not quilted out of some denim I have just to try something different because I've never sewn a lot with denim, to be honest.
Yes. She's going to make a jote, a jean tote.
A jote. Yeah, for sure. That's a thing now.
It's a thing. We're making it a thing.
So I think a pattern like this is awesome because you're going to get, like, in a couple hours with guidance, you can have a finished thing to take home and be like, yeah, I made this.
Yes.
Quilting, I think it's so hard to teach people because it's like, no, you're not done yet.
No.
Now you put all this stuff you cut up back together. And then you make, just stuff
I think it's a different set of skills that you need to learn once you learn how to sew.
Yeah. Because quilting is, for the most part, just sewing a straight line.
Yes.
That it's like, it's a whole different beast. But once you have basic skills, you can. And I do think someone can learn to sew. I mean, I learned to sew by making a quilt. Just flat out. That's just what I wanted to do. So that's what I learned. And like garments really intimidate me. So it's sort of your perspective on what you started with and where you learned. But I love the tote pattern. And I think that's a really cool idea for teaching a beginner.
I was a beginner sewist when I took a quilting class. And I feel like once I learned how to quilt, it really improved my sewing skills overall. So you make a good point there.
Yeah. I really kind of have also always felt like, well, first off, the way I have ever learned anything as far as like quilting, like techniques or whatever is like, this is just fabric. Like, I mean, I know it can be expensive and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that sort of stuff, but it's like, you know, like you're not going to mess it up.
Nope.
It's not life or death. Just try. And the way that I've learned the most is by like failing, honestly.
Yes.
So
The more mistakes you make, the better, because you're going to improve from that. Yeah.
And I still make mistakes. I don't make perfect quilts.
I don't either.
At all.
I strive for finished.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, though, somebody comes in and chooses, let's say they choose a tote bag. They pick their fabric that they like and they're ready. So how do you teach people to cut fabric?
Okay, so that was a step in my class. I would start my beginner classes out with, you know, talking about fabric. And I would tell them how fabric is sold by length. And they come in different widths, you know, 42 inch to 44 inch to 60 inch wide fabric. And then I would show them how to cut fabric 2 ways, either with a ruler and a marking tool of some sort, and fabric scissors, because most of the time people are starting with fabric scissors. They're not going to start with quilting tools. I think it's a more affordable option just to start with a basic ruler and scissors.
That's
and a marking tool.
Yeah, that's a great
So
idea.
after we would talk about fabric, I would show them how to cut fabric with the fabric scissors after we learned how to measure. And then once I finished that step, I would show them how I cut fabric. And that's with a cutting mat, a rotary tool, and an acrylic ruler. So I really wanted to show them both options and talk about each way to cut fabric so that they could go home later on and figure out which way they wanted to do it. But I thought it was more simple to show them how to cut with fabric scissors. That's how I learned how to cut fabric. And there's going to be projects where you will need to cut with fabric scissors, so you need to know how to do that.
For sure. And if you're teaching a young person,
Yes.
rotary cutters, I'm sorry, side note here, rotary cutters are dangerous, and we totally underestimate how much damage you can do with a rotary
Seriously.
cutter. And I'm like, man, if you're not using a cutting glove, I mean, I'm not saying I do every time, but I think about it almost every time because
Yes.
I have cut my finger
Oh my
really
gosh.
badly before, like a couple times. And not like to the bone or anything, but I'm like, that would be so easy to do. And so
Yes.
there are things that like, it's just, you know, let's be safe. Let's consider safety. And I like that you brought up affordability. When I was starting out, most of my notions and things like that came from my grandma,
Yes.
like just being like, yeah, I don't use this. You take it. And
Right.
even now, some people have 700 million sizes of ruler and different size rotary cutters. And
Yes.
I'm like, man, I'm making it work with this one
your one
size
ruler.
and like one mat. I mean, I have a couple cutting
Right.
mats for different purposes, but you can easily drag someone into like a situation of overwhelm. And I
Yes.
think for especially small projects, like maybe even explaining, I'm going to teach you how to use scissors. If you're like, if it's like a kid or a young person, be like, you know, if you want me to help you cut it out really quickly, you can watch me and I'll show you how to do
Yes.
this. So that's a great idea. My first quilt, my grandmother cut it out just like for me.
Yeah.
And that was great because
She was saving time because she knew how long it was going to take you to cut all of that.
yeah, for
Time
sure.
and fingers.
Yeah, lots of finger problems there.
Yes.
But so I'm pretty grateful for that. And it's like cutting is not the most glamorous step. And it's once you know how to do it, it's not that hard. So that might be an option too. Just like take care of some of the prep
Yes.
work for people so they
Yes,
can
I
get to
did.
the fun stuff.
Yes. So at my last class, one of my students was my 12-year-old son. And when we were at the cutting table and I was talking about all the scissors and tools, he picked up the rotary cutter and I was like, stop, drop it right now.
Yeah.
That is a dangerous tool.
It is.
Yes, I was terrified.
Yeah. So
I also, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I showed my students all of my thrifted notions. I have thrifted acrylic rulers and all kinds of stuff. And so, you know, again, with the affordability, I was like, hey, you can totally find this stuff at the thrift store. We have a sewing thrift store in town. So I covered all of that too when I was showing them how to cut with an acrylic ruler.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to invest in a machine, but then all the other stuff can be so pricey.
Yes.
And it accumulates really quickly. So you have to have some space for it.
It does.
So did you have your students cut everything themselves?
I did not. No, I had everything ready.
Okay. So you did the prep.
I did. But I did, the project was prepped prior to them showing up to the studio. But while they were there, I did show them how to cut everything.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if they wanted to go home and make a tote, they would know how to cut the fabric and all of that good stuff.
Perfect. So what was the next step?
Okay, so after we talked about fabric and learned how to cut the fabric, we would go sit at the machine. And I would have them gather around me and the Burnett B37, which is the machines that we had at the studio. And I would give them a basic rundown of the machine. I would show them every part, how the machine works. I would show them how to thread the machine, how to wind a bobbin, all that good stuff. And we would talk about seam allowance, how to measure the seam allowance using the stitch plate. I would show them how, to sew and how to measure the seam allowance. And then I would show them how to do a back stitch, how to pivot. So pretty much just a quick little rundown on how the machine works and how to sew a straight stitch.
Yep.
And then I would send them off to their machine to get started.
Did they have to thread their machine?
They did have to thread their machine.
Awesome.
I thought it was important that they knew how to thread their own machine. I considered having the machines threaded to save time, but I don't think that would have just been productive in the end because they would still have to go home and figure out how to thread a machine.
Yeah, and felt like intimidated by it.
Yes.
Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to break this thing.
Yes, or, if they had a threading issue while they were sewing, they were going to need to know how to rethread their machine. So I had them all thread their own machine.
Good.
Yeah, it went great.
Yeah. Awesome.
Very little troubleshooting issues.
Perfect.
Yes.
So then they got a copy of your pattern?
Yes.
As part of the class.
Yes.
And then did you just be like, okay? Or did you walk them through step by step
Okay, so
of the pattern?
my first class, we did the Texas size tote bag pattern. And that proved to be kind of difficult for an absolute beginner who's never sat at a sewing machine.
Okay.
The bag is kind of large.
Yeah.
They don't really know how to maneuver or manipulate fabric well enough.
To cram it through.
They've never pinned fabric.
Yeah.
So that Texas size tote bag class, everybody left with a finished project and they were so excited, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I held another class, I designed a whole other tote bag based off of the Texas size tote bag, but it was a simplified version. They're not making boxed corners.
Okay.
They're just sewing straight lines and they're not making fabric straps.
Okay. Just webbing.
Just webbing. So we learned how to sew a straight stitch, a back stitch, and how to pivot and how to work with webbing. At my second class, which
Nice.
seemed to go a lot better and quicker with my students.
Yeah, I can see that because the boxed corners are where you're kind of dealing with finger pressing and manipulating your seams
yes.
and lining stuff
Yes.
up and really having to pin. Did you teach people how to pin?
I did.
That sounds
Different ways to pin too.
Yeah, because things that we do that are second nature after you learn how to sew are
Yes.
oh yeah,
Yes.
you don't know anything.
And that's why I walked them through the pattern. We all had printed copies of the pattern in front of us at both classes, and I would walk them through each step. I would show them how to read through a pattern, make sure you have all of your supplies, and then I would read the first step, and we would just walk through it together. I sat at my own machine.
Yeah.
And we just sewed our projects together. And once we got to a step where, they had to pin fabric, I would show them how to pin the fabric.
Yeah.
Or how to do something a certain way. And so it worked out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you, let's see, another part of teaching quilting that may not be as relevant in the tote bag patterns is pressing. Did you have ironing stations around?
I did.
Pressing stations?
I had one pressing station set up.
Okay.
And so that was part of the how to cut fabric and how fabric is sold. after we cut the fabric, we did press our fabrics. I showed them the difference between ironing and pressing.
Yeah. You know what, though? I have a confession to make. Even all this time that I've quilted, I iron.
Yeah.
Is that bad?
I usually don't even iron or press anything.
I do a lot now of just like finger pressing because I'm like, I always like press my blocks. Well, I iron my blocks when they're finished for the most part. Unless I have like a problem area, then I'm like, I'm just gonna press that a little bit and like.
I don't press my fabrics before cutting for quilting projects. Most of the time I don't, unless it's a wrinkle that looks really bad and I know it's going to interfere with the sewing process, then I will, but most of the time I don't.
I'm the same way.
In my tote bag pattern, you get to a part where you have to press with an iron. When I'm making the tote bag for myself at home, I don't press. I finger press. I don't press with an iron. And that's just to save time on my end.
Yeah, that's how I am too. And now that we're like saying it, I'm like, I don't even remember because I followed the pattern. I'm usually really bad about patterns. Like I just can't follow a pattern. I'm like,
I can't either. I do my own thing most of the time.
I do too. Like,
it was kind of hard writing this pattern for that reason.
Like, okay, I have the measurements and now I'm going to just like be wild.
Yes.
But I am not like I said, I've learned quilting. I can make a lot of stuff quilting, but when you like take it back to basics, it's a lot to cram into like one project. So the tote bag pattern is awesome. And if somebody wanted to quilt it, like a panel or the outside, like you totally could. That's what I did.
If you already know how to quilt, you're going to know how to just quilt that exterior piece and then continue making the pattern as it's written.
Yeah, and like your one design of your tote bag is really cool because you could do like the kind of stripped down version for super beginners, the regular pattern for I've taken one sewing class and now I'm ready to try this. And then you could do like variations on a theme for like the next level. So that's really cool.
Yes.
Sometimes I don't know how to recommend to people where to start. You know, I'm like, I guess I could be like, just make a 9 patch or, you know, an alternating 9 patch with a regular square to have kind of an Irish chain looking thing. But also I'm like, or pick what you want to make and we'll figure it out. Yeah. But I think that might have to do with people's different learning styles and personalities.
And that's why I think a tote bag is a great beginner project because it's going to end up being something that you love and use, especially if it's a basic beginner tote bag.
Yeah. And the size tote bag you put together is amazing because when I have a bag, I'm going to put stuff in it and I'm going to put a lot of stuff in it. Yes. So this is like a big honker. It could work as like a beach bag, a pool bag.
Yes.
Groceries. Yes. Whatever you need.
And there's minimal fabric waste once you're done cutting it out. So that really helps too because I'm just overloaded with scraps and we're not trying to make waste here. So
yeah, I love that.
It worked out.
But I do think encouraging people to find something that they really want to do, like even if somebody said they wanted to make a quilt, okay, fine. You want to make a quilt. You could even do a tote bag and do an outer patchwork kind of panel. And then you wouldn't even have to totally quilt it. You could like put interfacing inside of it just to keep it kind of reinforced maybe.
Right. I would, if I was going to teach someone how to quilt, I would start with strip piecing and a 9 patch. That's what I learned. That's how I learned to quilt. And I love 9 patches. I love
it's classic.
That style of quilting. It's my favorite.
Yeah, totally classic.
And I just think that would be easy.
Well, I learned on a 9 patch, and it was, my grandma just cut individual squares, and I had to sew every square together. So, yeah, I was like 8. And it was like 1996-ish, which is funny. I don't know, maybe in the 90s. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure it did exist, strip piecing, because have you ever seen the Eleanor Burns book about something about stripping?
Oh, that's right. Yes, I have seen that.
And it's about strip piecing, but I can't remember
what the title is.
What it was called, but it's classic.
Yes.
But once again, you got to trust people with a rotary cutter. But you could do scissors, fabric scissors for like some strip piecing.
Yes.
But sometimes long seams are really easy to like mess up or whatever. So I
Get
don't
a
know.
nice curve once you open up that strip that you just cut. When I took a quilting class, they had us bring all of our own quilting tools, like your own cutting mat, your own acrylic ruler, and your own rotary cutter. And then they demonstrated how to cut fabric using your acrylic ruler and rotary. And then they had you practice in front of them with your own tools, which makes sense because you're going to go home with those tools and be cutting with that fabric.
Yeah, that does make sense. And
I feel like that's too much of a liability on my end. But if I was going to teach quilting, you're going to have to learn how to cut with a rotary cutter at some point. So
yeah.
we would probably end up doing that in class.
Yeah.
Sign a waiver or something.
Also, they make cutting gloves.
They do.
Like, there's different levels. I think a lot of like chefs will use them. Like, there's probably not going to be any chefs listening to this podcast, but a hardcore chef would probably be like, ugh, what?
For sure.
Kind of like hardcore quilters do not use rotary gloves, like cutting gloves. But I mean, look, I'm just going to recommend this again. I see a lot of nasty injuries, and all it takes is 1 second, and bam, it's gone. So just I would use a cutting glove, and you could encourage your students to do it. And my grandmother told me to do it, even though she didn't do it all the time. I think she had a slip one time, and then she started using her glove more. And so she was like, oh, you better put your glove on if I was ever at her house, like cutting with her. So
that would be a good idea, just to get your students started with a glove on so that
it's just basic.
Yes, they get used to it. They're cutting at home, they're automatically going to put on their glove.
Yeah. Safety first, folks. Yeah. If your sewing machine is skipping a stitch or just needs a little TLC, we've got just the fix for you. Check out our friends at Creative Stitches, where any machine in the greater San Angelo area, regardless of make or model, gets the care it needs to keep running smoothly. They'll even offer convenient pickup and drop-off services. Give them a call at 325-895-8523. That's 325-895-8523. Keep your stitches neat and your creativity flowing with Creative Stitches. I think all of that. What else? Is there anything else that you think we didn't talk about that you kind of found? Because you probably learned just how much you know versus how much somebody just doesn't know by actually going through a class with someone.
So it's quite a huge undertaking to teach someone how to sew. And I did not realize that until I was actually preparing for a class, just how much somebody does not know about sewing that you have to teach them. Even all the sewing terms that you had to know. I made a list and defined them all and handed them to my students, and we briefly went over it. So you have all of your terms, but even once you're sewing, they don't know what a raw edge is, or like what the right side of fabric is or what the wrong side of the fabric is. So there's just so much detail that goes into teaching someone how to sew. Yeah. My classes, I try to keep them at 2.5 hours, but they were going to about 3.
Yeah.
Just trying to cover everything so that you could go home and be confident enough to
try something
on your own.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to leave with a finished product, which was the goal, and everyone did. I successfully taught 5 students how to sew.
I think that's awesome. So do you think you took formal classes at some point? You took a quilting class.
That was the only class. I just took a quilting class.
Yeah. And then but y'all went to an activity where you did aprons.
Okay, yes,
at the library,
but
that was more like an activity.
Yes, and that was before I knew how to sew. Mm-hmm. The library had advertised like a free beginner class, and it was on how to sew an apron. But we got there, and the machines were already threaded, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't even think they told us which way to turn the hand wheel or anything type of deal.
That was like a go have fun and do this, which is fine. But I don't know. Do you think you would recommend like a formal class for someone?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. We had fun at our classes, and everyone left knowing how a machine works, how to thread a machine, how to sew, and left with their own tote bag that they made.
Yeah, and left with their own tote bag, and like you said, some confidence.
Yes.
And some skills to go try whatever they wanted.
Yes.
I think that this is an important thing to remember, is that even though we quilt, let's say, you could still make a bag because you know how to straight stitch.
Yes, absolutely.
You know how to work your machine. You could still make, I mean, look, I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth here because I have not sewn garments. I'm pretty intimidated by it, but I do have some patterns because I'm really intrigued by it and I'm a little fascinated by it. And a lot of those are just straight lines. If you pick like a good pattern, I mean, obviously, like I'm not going to be making some like Oxford button-down shirt because I'm not going to make a buttonhole or like a collar.
Right.
Like I'm just going to tell you that's not happening. And the idea of sewing like a sleeve into, I'm like, that seems like too much for me. But I could probably figure it out. But
You definitely could.
But like someone who could sit and learn how to make something like, yeah, I made this tote bag. Why not make a little pair of like elastic waist skirt or shorts or whatever? Totally, totally doable. So I think that's important to remember, is that we have a lot of like overlapping skills and knowledge. So teaching someone just the bare bones, the bare basics. I'm trying to think. The way I learned quilting was on a small project, like a tiny little 9-patch. My grandmother exclusively hand quilted, so she taught me how to hand quilt. Oh, wow. If it was a small project, I think that's reasonable.
Wait, so were you hand piecing?
Yeah,
and then hand quilting?
was.
Okay.
And then once I got, because I think she didn't trust me to not like sew through my finger. She had like, and I'm sure too, that's how she learned. So she probably was like, you better start, you know, how like the old school education is like you start with the like minimal and then you get to work your way up to.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
If I was going to teach my child, I would want for them to learn how to hand sew.
You think?
First, yes.
Well, especially something like patchwork. It's not like a tote bag that you're going to be using. Like, I mean, if I was hand stitching a tote bag, it would just fall straight apart.
Oh,
probably.
Yeah, for sure. I would not want to hand piece a bag.
No, I would not. And I remember following an account, and she was hand sewing garments that she like wore.
Oh my gosh.
And she was doing all these like amazing like stitches, like back stitching and all this stuff. And I was like,
I'm not going to do the most when there's a faster and efficient way of sewing. You're not going to see me doing any of that.
Yeah, me neither. But I think it's, I think like young kids, I mean, I was like 7 or 8 when, you know, my grandma just taught me how to do a needle and thread, and like she did most of the cutting stuff for me.
And most kids, they just really don't have the attention span to sit at a machine long enough. Even my 12-year-old, he got up a couple times and walked around and, oh, this is hard, you know? And so, and he's 12, he's almost 13, and he was just kind of like, but he was excited once we were done.
Yeah. I feel like that even when I'm in the middle of a project. I'm like, why did I do this? I don't even like it. It's like a cycle.
Yes.
And then I will start finishing it, and I'm like, oh, I guess it's not so bad.
Yes.
And then I finish it, and I'm like, yeah.
Yes, I love this. I feel that way with every single quilt. I'm like, why did I do this? Oh my gosh, I hate it. And then once it's finished, I'm like, oh, I love this. Why did I think that?
I know. I have times where I'm like, this fabric is horrible. The colors are horrible. I'm doing horrible work. Why? And then I'm like, no, this is pretty cool. I think it's because it just takes so much energy and time, but somehow I still love it.
I know the feeling.
I keep admiring your strawberry. I love this idea. So I was trying to remember like my first quilting project. I think for me, the hardest part of quilting to actually like perfect was putting binding on, because the corners were totally mysterious to me.
My most difficult part is joining the binding strips after the binding's been sewn down on one side.
Oh, man.
That's the worst. I never get it done on the first try.
Okay, well, I used to not until the last like 2 years because I found a method that's like, if you do it the same way every time, it's foolproof. I'll show it to you.
And I don't make enough quilts to practice binding that often. So every time I finish a quilt, it's brand new all over again.
Yeah. I think that was my problem. And then I just got totally addicted and I was like still just like cranking these babies out. So, also, I think important to remember and consider is that there are different ways to do the same thing. And so I love what you said about teaching people different ways to cut, different ways to pin. I think showing people what you know is great, but being like, there's other ways to do this and you can do it like this or that, or
I try to.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because then it gives people a little bit of maybe empowerment to try their own thing.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing maybe when we're teaching people is just remembering what we're actually doing is just encouraging their own creative journey because that's like what it's all about.
Yes, exactly.
So I think I'm trying to think because I've had recently people be like, you should have quilting classes. And I'm like,
Yes.
But I think maybe if someone wanted to make a quilt, I would first off probably just pick like a block or something to put into a tote bag or a pouch. I don't even know where I'm going with that. And then just have a small little thing and be like, well, this is going to have to be like 3 or 4 sessions of like prep because prep is a big thing.
Or you can buy a charm pack. 5-inch squares already cut out.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
look
good
true.
together, and then teach them how to sew all of those together.
Yeah, just sew it together, and then make your quilt sandwich, which is also that's hard. I'm still trying to figure out my favorite way to do that, and I don't have a favorite way because I just don't like doing it. Basting, just don't love it.
Nope. I still tape it to the floor in my living room and crawl all over the place.
That's what I do. But do you spray or pin?
I pin.
I do too. I don't like that spray. I feel like, speaking of dangerous, I'm like, that is a lot of fumes.
That is a lot of fumes.
You can use Elmer's glue.
I've seen that, yes.
I've done it. If you're going to wash something, because you'll have like little hard spots. But I've also thought, what if you did half glue, half water, and like a spray?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super cheap. You have to let it dry, but you could probably set it with like
yes, you really could.
middle heat iron kind of thing. So I don't know. Maybe we're also just going to invent our own ways to do things, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yes.
I do remember my mama teaching me certain things, and it was like, this is how you do it.
Oh, wow.
Probably just because she'd done it that way for forever, but I bet she also had tried a lot of different stuff, and this is just like what worked.
Right.
So that's how she taught me to do it.
This isn't the way they taught me how to bind. When I took my quilting class, it was really confusing, and I didn't like the way that they taught us. So I went out.
Did they teach you on to machine bind or hand bind?
Hand bind.
Okay. Yeah. So that's how I learned to bind, and I think because I learned it that way, it looks different. It has a different finish, and that's just how I've liked to do it. I like how it looks that way, but
even the way they joined their binding was different too.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, there's a million ways to do
really
it.
are.
And I also think that directing, once you get like your basic kind of vocabulary and knowledge kind of under your belt, that also, I would probably show people like, look, if you want to do it this way, we can do it. But if you want to try something else, maybe have some links to like tutorials that they could look at, or like reputable like YouTube channels or whatever.
So I've been quilting maybe like 1.5 years now, but I would take your quilting class because I want to see how you do things.
Oh my gosh.
Because I wouldn't be
on.
confident enough to teach someone how to quilt, just mainly because of my binding. My binding looks fine here, but I don't think I could.
This binding is beautiful. I feel like I got a tutorial from you about how to do this, and I think I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it on a project because it looks really good. The way I've tried. So I have tried to challenge myself to like just do some different things. Because if you know how to do things in a variety of ways, you could teach people, you know, it's like, I'm going to teach these kids how to machine bind because they're going to be way happier with a machine bound thing that is finished than like, I mean, I love hand binding something over the course of like 4 days. I just love it. But, you know, sometimes it puts you in a pickle. Or some people don't love sitting still and stitching stuff like that. So finished is always, finished is always better than perfect. So I tried a different way to machine bind. I didn't like it. I actually despised it. I thought about ripping it all out, but I used a really small stitch length. And I was like, that's going to be too.
Especially on a woven. You like to sew quilts with wovens.
I know. And it actually wasn't. My binding was not woven, but it was like this vintage gingham. And I was like, if I'm seam ripping that and I like accidentally poke a hole through it, I'll have to redo the binding. And I would be angry. So
that type of fabric is super thin, especially if it's fabric. I mean, vintage.
It was very thin. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to just accept this as my skill level right now. And I'm going to just do it better next time.
There you go.
So that's kind of part of it too. I think being open and honest about like, you know, I don't make perfect stuff that I love is an important thing to do with people. But the people who I've had reach out to me and be like, you should show me how to quilt. I'm like, yeah, okay, I will. Just when you find a pattern that you like, tell me. Because there are a lot of like free quilt patterns for beginners. I don't think you need a free pattern, but usually I think they tend to be pretty simple.
More basic, beginner
or,
friendly at least.
Yeah, or like blog posts that have, you know, tips, tricks, stuff like that.
A video would be nice.
I think videos are like, I just remember, I remember my grandmother showing me how she like turned her corners, and she was like, well, you just do it like this. And then she'd have this perfect like binding corner. And then when I tried to do it, it was like a mangled up mess. And I was like, man, I like wish I had a video of her hands like doing that. So maybe that would be something if you were teaching someone, just be like, if you want to get your phone out and take a video of this, check this out. Like, I can repeat things. I'll show you whatever. But
or a blog post with step-by-step photos.
Yeah. And those are everywhere. Those are out there for sure. So
that's how I get these so perfect. Emily Dennis. She has a great blog post on her website.
Of binding?
Well, how to get your corners nice and sharp like this.
Oh, perfect. Good. So there's always something out there. And I would say if you find something online and you don't love what it is because you're learning, just find a different one. If you're in a class and you don't love how they do something, you could do your own thing. But I think it's good to try the way somebody teaches you to do something so you can figure out for yourself what you do or you don't like.
And most of the time, any quilter who's writing patterns has a beginner-friendly and free quilt pattern.
Yeah, I think so too. We have one thing I wanted to talk about that we touched on a little bit, and we talked about this a little bit in your episode, was affordability and like just barrier to entry. If someone was gathering supplies to like say make their first quilt or Texas size tote, let's just say, where would you recommend they look for fabric, notions, that kind of stuff? I have some thoughts, some ideas, but I want to hear yours too.
I would try to find some sort of like creative reuse center in your town.
Yeah.
We don't have.
Which used to annoy me because I was like, we live in a small town. We don't have one, but we do.
We do now, yes.
We do. There's a place called the Sewing Cottage. And I mean, we live in, I would say, small town Texas. We're not like a one stoplight kind of town. We have a loop, but
we don't have an interstate that goes through San Angelo.
We're less than 200,000 people here. But there is an auxiliary at a retirement community. It's called the Sewing Cottage, and they have so much fabric. And they have thread, they have patterns. It's all stuff based on donations from people cleaning out sewing rooms, estate sale kind of stuff. But it's really high quality. They take great care of it. They organize it well.
Yes.
So those places exist.
They do.
Sometimes you have to kind of get to know your local community, I think, to get the inside scoop on some of those things. But I would highly encourage people to find a place like that, like you say.
Yes.
It may not be labeled the cheap fabric creative reuse store of St. Angelo or whatever, but I bet there's something. And then I always want to make a plug for like a local group, like our quilt club has an opportunity table where people will bring old books, magazines, fabric. I've never seen anything amazing like rulers.
No.
Or like notions, but I've seen
pretty vintage fabric.
Yeah, I've seen thread there.
Yeah.
So those are great resources. And I've never had someone just straight up ask me for like fabric. But if somebody did, I'd probably be like, yeah, what do you like? Like,
Yes.
go check
I
this
had
out.
bins and bins of fabric for practicing on that class. So much fabric. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have way too much.
Yeah.
I'm stressed out at the thought of all the fabric I have.
Well, the solution there is just stop thinking about it.
Stop thinking about it. And that's what we're going to use in my classes to practice on. So,
yeah.
and if there's anyone who needs free fabric and they're learning to sew at home, please send me a message. I will give you some fabric.
Yeah, for sure.
I would love to.
I know. Because you want to send it somewhere that someone's going to use it and like learn and stuff.
Thanks for checking out the Patchwork Revival podcast. As a small way to say thank you, I am offering a discount in my pattern shop especially for you. Head over to the link in the show notes to find my shop and enter code REVIVAL for 15% off your purchase. You'll also find a link to Fat Quarter Shop, my go-to online fabric and notions retailer. By using this link, a portion of any purchase you make will help support the making of future episodes. Thanks for supporting the Patchwork Revival podcast.
As far as notions go, where do you think people should or could look, and what do you think they should buy? I mean, we've talked about the sewing machine. We know that. Splurge on your sewing machine.
Yes.
I mean, really, like, don't make yourself broke or like max out a credit card. Find something affordable. There are good machines for affordable prices.
Right.
But you're going to need more than just your sewing machine.
Yes.
So.
Well, I started sewing or cutting on a Fisker's cutting mat from Walmart, and I love it. It's still my favorite one to this day.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that Walmart has good stuff.
They still have a sewing section.
They really do. They do have fabric there. It's not the best like quality for making a quilt, but
it'll work.
It's good enough to learn. If you see something you like, just grab it. But their notions, they have, a couple brands of rotary cutters and multiple sizes. And I mean, they're a big box store, but.
Yes, I started off buying most of my supplies from Walmart, a Fisker's rotary cutter and my cutting mat from Walmart. And then I got like an OmniGrid ruler from Hobby Lobby. And that's what I was quilting with for a long time. And then felt like I was ready to upgrade, and I did. And
I still, like, Hobby Lobby has, some people have really strong opinions on supporting them as a business, and you don't have to. But any big box store like that usually will have coupons, and you can get some good stuff.
Yes. They have designer fabric, Robert Kaufman fabric there.
Yeah,
you can use for quilting, and their
every
fabric,
other week they have a 40% off sale.
Yep.
Yeah, affordability is it is important. I think it makes you, if you're like, I got this for a good price, so if I mess up, it's going to be okay.
Right. Yes.
But I've quilted for a long time. I quilted in smaller spaces. Now I have much more space that I can like kind of own and claim. But I do think if you're quilting and you're going to be using or even doing a tote bag pattern, get a big cutting mat. You can kind of like slide it behind a desk, a table, something.
Right.
But it's really hard to cut fabric. You have to be able to like lay it out.
Right.
So
Yes.
I would say if you especially if you can find like a coupon, get you a good size cutting mat. The Fiskars ones from Walmart are great. I just bought a mid-sized one yesterday, like a 23 by 18 or something like that, but basically what I have is a big mat, like what are they? 36 by 20, like a big one, tabletop one. And then
36 by 24, I think.
Yes. And then I have like an 8 by 14 inch ruler. And that's what I cut almost everything with. Oh my gosh. I know. Because I have a longer one, but when I try to cut yardage with it, I slip. Like I drift. And so I just fold it and I cut that way.
At the quilting class, they taught us how to move your hand as you're cutting along the ruler so it doesn't slip. But I mean, I slip every time, so.
Yeah, I know. I try that. And
do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. I just have crooked stuff. Like, it's fine.
You can't even, you don't even notice it once the quilt's washed. And
it's
whatever.
in the seam allowance. We'll just go with that. But I think these are great tips. Let's talk though, like if someone needed a little basic shopping list, we talked about cutting mat. I would get a rotary cutter.
I have a little graphic here where I talk about basic sewing tools and then other helpful tools. So as like a basic beginner, you only really need a few things.
Yeah.
But if you think you're going to get into quilting, I would, definitely get a rotary cutter, cutting mat, an acrylic ruler, fabric clips,
a cutting glove.
Cutting glove. Yes.
And then you would need other things too, like a walking foot for your sewing machine. May or may not, come with it. I don't know. I don't know. Do machines come with like walking feet? Might just depend.
It depends on the price that you're paying for the machine.
Yeah.
But basic beginner machines do not come with a walking foot.
Okay. See, she knows so much.
My Bernina 770 came with a walking foot.
I have a FAF Performance something. I don't know. I've gotten it so long ago I can't even really remember the model, but it has like a built-in functionality. They call it a dual feed. So it just.
You know what? Yes, that's on my machine too.
Yeah. Okay.
I purchased my walking foot separately.
Okay.
Machines do not come with a walking foot because even my Singer heavy duty, I had to purchase that walking foot separately.
Yeah. But like my IDT feature, I don't have a walking foot. Like I don't need one because it's basically like built into the mechanism of the machine. And I really like that. I think things like once you get a little bit more into it, if you're like, using like a 1/4 inch foot and then changing to your walking foot or whatever you need to do, like just ask someone to show you or help you or Google it.
I did not have any of that when I started sewing. That was not part of my basic sewing kit.
Yeah.
None of that.
You don't really need it.
I was sewing for a while before I even considered quilting and took the quilting class. And that was a whole separate set of tools that I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Thread, if someone was going to bust out, just their little sewing machine they kind of know how to use and their fabric scissors and they're going to make your Texas size tote. And they have their fabric because they have like a couple things from projects they've used, blah, blah, blah. Thread. What kind of thread do you think they should go get?
So like for affordability, you could probably use Coates and Clark dual duty polyester thread from Walmart.
Yeah.
But if you have a little bit more experience, I would use another higher quality polyester thread.
Yeah.
I would always recommend using a polyester thread for any sort of bag making. You're going to put weight in a bag most of the time and cotton thread's going to snap.
Yeah.
I always question the durability of a lot of quilted totes that are vintage antique. People are cutting up antique quilts and then making a bag out of it. Are they using polyester thread? Because they probably need to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But that's what I would recommend.
Awesome.
A polyester thread. If you're just starting out, grab some from a big box store like Walmart.
Yeah, there's really no shame in like going to a big box store to get supplies. In some places, that might be your only option that you have, and that's totally fine. Obviously, like I value small businesses and local quilt shops and things like that, but they just may not have exactly what you need for that time. And that is fine. It is fine. It is also fine to just ask for help. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, just ask someone. Somebody will show you how they do stuff. Or just be like, you're going to a quilt club, be like, wow, your binding is so cool. How did you do that?
Right.
And sometimes they'll tell you and it will sound like a foreign language. And you'll be like, wow, thanks. And they'll be like, I can't do that. But I don't know. So I would say neither of us are beginners. But is there a sewing or quilting, any kind of technique that you want to learn a new way, learn in general, or perfect?
Yes, foundation paper piecing. I want to learn how to do that.
Okay.
I love when people do a good fussy cut of an image and then it's foundation paper pieced around it. I love that.
Yeah. So I kind of have something, I have a lot of like kind of bucket list quilting stuff I want to do. And one of mine is I want to make a like a pineapple quilt, like the old school pineapple quilts. But I have like particular colors in mind, and I'm not going to buy yardage because I want it to be scrappy. I just have a vision. Yes. But a lot of those are paper pieced.
I didn't know that.
I mean, I think it's like more like basic paper piecing. It's not like, people do these like incredible, like Pride and Joy quilting her like portraits. I'm like,
oh my gosh,
those eyes are tiny, and like the alphabets and all these things. I'm like, that is amazing. I'm not doing that.
Right.
But that skill.
That's the FPP I'm not trying to learn. I want the basic stuff.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, a little FPP economy block. That's awesome, because that's how you're going to get like amazing accuracy. I always like traditional piecing, but I am not good at like economy blocks. I'm just not. I'm always cutting off my seam allowance or my points, and I'm just whatever.
I've never made one.
I think that's what I want to perfect as well. When you said FPP, I was like, me too.
FPP and free motion quilting.
Oh, man. Okay.
You're like the free motion quilting queen right now. So
I free motion quilt on my machine. I think the biggest thing for me with free motion quilting, what I tell people is you have to understand you're going to screw up or like not realize your vision or feel like so afraid you're going to ruin your quilt top. But when you're done, like you wash your quilt and it looks so cool. But you have to really be patient and get to know your machine, because my machine, there's like certain directions when I'm pushing the quilt or moving the quilt that I have to really be sure there's not drag or like the thread will break. It only likes certain kinds of thread for that kind of stuff. Wow. So you have to just, I don't know. You learn a lot by just like messing stuff up or feeling like you messed up. But I really like free motion quilting. I think it's so cool. I would also really like to learn. My husband Jordan is over there, and I'm like scared to say it. I really want a long arm, and I would love to learn how to free motion on a long arm.
Yes.
Part of the appeal of the long arm machine is the lack of requirement for basting. Is that ridiculous?
Yes. It's not. I totally agree with you.
If I'm going to quilt for long in my life, I can't be like crawling around on the floor and like.
No, I agree. Our quilt shop, you can pay them to baste a quilt, and I have an 82 inch by 82 inch that I am really considering sending to them so they can baste it on the long arm. That way I can quilt it at home.
Yeah, by yourself.
Right.
That's actually a good idea, because, outsourcing a little help where you need it.
Yes.
It's never a bad thing. It's always like,
Can you imagine trying to baste a quilt of that size? It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. I think the biggest ones I've based, or I've like really made that I've basted by myself, were like twin size things. Mm-hmm. And those are not that fun, but I really do. I use the Elmer's glue, and it makes it fast and relatively easy. And it's pretty cheap. Basting spray is expensive, but you can get it on a coupon.
Right.
Also, there's no shame. And if you piece a quilt like that, you can piece a pretty good sized quilt top. And it's pretty easy. I mean, if you know the basics, you can do that and make your first quilt pretty easily. The hardest part, I think, is quilting it and figuring out how to do that. And that can be super overwhelming. So, of course, there's no shame in like long arming, getting a professional long armor to long arm your quilt tops. I'm saying this, and I've never had a top. Well, I did like a t-shirt quilt, and I had that long armed because I was like, I can't run this like flannel and interfacing and stuff. No. I did like a flannel backing on it.
Yeah, I would never do a t-shirt quilt, number one, but that makes sense to send it to a long arm.
Yeah. But I've never had a quilt top that I made long armed.
Oh. Maybe if I had a quilt commissioned, I would send it to a long arm so that it would be perfect and beautiful. Yeah. But other than that, no, I'm not sending it to a long arm.
Yeah. But some people do, and that's a great awesome way to get stuff finished. Some people, I don't know how many still do it, but some long armors offer binding services where they'll, like, I don't think it's cheap, right?
Right. Well, sending it to the long arm in the first place can't be too cheap.
Yeah. I think it might depend on, well, obviously depends on your size of your quilt, but I think it also depends maybe on like the density of your like panto. I don't know. I really don't know. But I think they typically price it by like the square inch. Right. So, I mean, we talk about affordability and you can do things in an affordable way, but also like if sewing is your hobby and you really want to learn how to do it, you got to be prepared to just like drop some cash, you know?
Yes.
So
I've, one of my quilts that I finished a while back, I did 1/2-inch echoed curved lines.
Oh my gosh, so good.
It gave the best texture. Like that's one of my favorite quilts, and it's the coziest and most comfy. And I think I'm going to quilt all of my quilts with that design from here on out.
You do?
Yes, I loved it that much.
It looks incredible. I feel like I always start with these grand ideas, and then after I do like 20 lines, like 1/2-inch spaced, I'm like, oh my gosh.
I definitely had some mid-project regret syndrome with that one. Yeah. It took a while, mainly because I was on a time crunch. It was for my daughter's birthday.
Yeah. So you're like staying up at all hours in the night to like finish it.
It looks beautiful. It's my favorite. And I got it from that walk book.
Yes. If you, actually, that's a great thing. So I've always been a self-finisher. I just like finishing my own quilts. And one way that I learned, I really wanted to like stretch and challenge myself a little bit. And Jackie Gehring's book, Walk, she also has Walk 2.0. You can make some of the coolest.
Yes.
I mean, it looks like a long arm did it. It just really helps give you some confidence to finish your quilts. And like, I like to finish my quilts because I enjoy it. I'm not going to say all the time,
right?
A lot of the time. Right. I do enjoy that process. So
I think if I could get my quilt top basted by someone else and then finish the quilt myself, it would be just the best thing ever. Yeah. I would enjoy it a whole lot more.
Yeah. There are videos of people basting their quilts on the wall. I don't have a wall big enough.
I don't. And then you have to consider those wall tiles that they are using. Those things are not cheap.
Yeah. They're not. Some people just do like drywall sheets, cover them with like felt or batting.
Right. How large can you get those drywall sheets?
I think
like
you
the
could
size
do
of a wall. Well, because I thought they were just panels.
They are, but I think you can get multiples and just kind of like hang them together,
tape them together to make a big wall.
Oh my gosh! But I'm like, I don't really have like a big enough, smooth enough wall. I think to like wall based something.
Right.
I have done the pool noodles that you like roll stuff on. And then I've like cleared off our dining table that's usually wide enough. And I just like start at one end and then I'll like roll them out and I just use my Elmer's glue that way. And that's a little bit more bearable than the floor.
Right. See, this is why I'm taking your quilting class, because you can show me all the different ways to baste.
The funniest thing is I feel like if I did a quilting class, it would be like, what is the like cheapest, most efficient way to just get your project done?
Yes. I mean,
Because
I live on that too.
yeah. And I think that's probably why we enjoy quilting, is because we're like, okay, let's just get this done. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to be finished.
How can I make this as frugal as possible in the cutest way?
Yeah. And like, then if you kind of just start from something that's kind of like baseline cheap, like cost wise, not necessarily quality wise, right? Then if you want to like splurge on something, it's like not such a big deal.
Right. And you can find designer fabric on sale all the time. I buy most of my fabric on sale.
Yeah, I do too. I actually recently bought fabric for a quilt. I'm going to make a Halloween quilt for my daughter's bed because I made one for my son's bed. And so I bought this like new line of fabric. I bought the Art Gallery Fabrics Eerie, some of them. There's like it's like a pretty little Halloween floral,
I don't
and I'm
think
gonna
I've seen it yet.
It's cute.
I liked their Spooky and Sweet.
Yes, last year's.
Yes. Well, they had like two, Spooky and Sweet and like Spooky and Sweeter or something. I don't know. But their previous ones were really cute.
Yeah, they have these like girly Halloween, which I don't know.
I love the way their fabric feels.
It feels very
different.
luxurious, but I bought it all like fabric requirement wise, like for a twin size. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know the last time. Like I bought the backing, everything. I was like, I don't even know the last time I paid full price for like 10 yards of fabric.
Yeah.
It was not cheap, but it's going to be beautiful.
Shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally shocked because I'm always going to the Sewing Cottage, our little reuse store. That's where I get tons of like big yardage for backings.
Yes. Yes. I've bought yardage for a backing from there as well. And I've been finding bolts of fabric out in the wild while thrifting or on Facebook Marketplace of designer fabric.
I mean, yeah. What even? Like, it's all out there.
It is out there. There's estate sales and garage sales happening all the time from.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would try to, especially, I mean, I know quilting, so that's kind of the perspective I like speak from, but is just find what you like and there's a way to make it work.
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm not going to like encourage someone to make like a patchwork quilt out of like corduroy that would weigh like 700 pounds.
Yeah.
But if you really like it, I guess you could make a little bag out of it or something like that. Like there's always a way to kind of see your vision come to life. And if you don't really have a vision yet and you just want to learn, like just ask someone, hey, I found this pattern. I was wondering, would you help me cut it or help me pick fabrics? Or do you have any ideas for what fabrics I could pick? And I'd probably be like, just come to my house and I'll help you pick out some of my super plain Jane neutral woven fabric. That's like what I have a million yards of. But I have some vintage stuff too that people would probably like. Or I'd go with them to Hobby Lobby, or I keep saying Hobby Lobby because that's just the store we have here. We don't have a Joann.
I know.
But aren't Joann's closing?
I'm not sure what the deal is.
I don't either. We're too busy going to the Sewing Cottage here.
Yes, to the thrift stores around here.
Yep.
Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, you're really good at navigating.
I just go to strangers' houses like, no big deal.
Yeah. There's this thing I've seen on Instagram about like girls dressing as like dudes to be in public so they don't get like catcalled or kidnapped or whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's hilarious.
Bree should be doing that, going to her Facebook Marketplace hauls.
It's usually a sweet little older woman.
I know.
Who can't sew anymore. And
I know.
They want to offload their fabric.
Yeah, they're like grandkids put it up for them or something.
Yes.
So
I recently found some bolts of Raleigh Blake fabric, and the lady, she just can't really sew anymore. Her health isn't great. And she was like, what do you need for your studio? I have all this stuff that I'm trying to get rid of.
It's amazing.
It was amazing.
Sewers,
they're very generous.
They're a very generous sort. I mean, really. because I think it's because we find such joy, and like a lot of people I think come to sewing to find like healing.
Yes.
Or
And that's why I wanted to share my passion for sewing with others and teach people how to sew. I think it's very rewarding.
it is like, look at this cool stuff I
Yes.
made.
Like you made this with your hands, especially if it's something that you can use, like a tote bag or
sure.
a quilt. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Don't be scared. Teach people what you know. You don't have to be perfect because they're not going to be perfect. But I think even that is such like a generous act of like giving your time and your knowledge, because kind of like we were talking about back in the day, it was like, this is like our oral tradition, like oral history.
Right.
And it was just a skill that people had, was being able to sew. And then people would like share their patchwork patterns or templates or scraps and things like that. And I think it's so cool that we still just kind of naturally, I think so many quilters still have that like passion and that like spirit. It's like, I want to share this with people.
Right.
Like these scraps on your strawberry came from your Instagram friend.
Yes.
So that people are always wanting to share. And I would say don't be shy if you're learning how to quilt or sew something. Just like dive in and go for it.
Yes, and always reach out to the person who's teaching or who had taught you how to sew, because they're just a wealth of knowledge and they want to share that with you.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
if you have questions, just ask someone who knows how to sew.
Yeah, always just ask. And when in doubt, YouTube.
Yes.
If it's like midnight because you're trying to finish something and somebody won't answer their phone or whatever, get on the YouTube.
Yes, midnight, because that's when we are getting most of our work done.
Yeah, I know, because our children are in bed.
Oh my
and then
gosh.
you're like half asleep and you're like, but I want to keep going because I know as soon as I wake up, I won't have time to do this.
And most of the time I'm making a lot of mistakes because I'm tired and it's late and I can't see that great. And I'm like, wow, I wasted my time even.
I know, I'm the same way. I'm like, okay, I can't rip this seam without like losing my mind. So I'm just gonna set it aside.
Yes.
Well, I think that's all we have time for today. But I think we covered some really awesome stuff.
We did.
Thanks for tuning in to Patchwork Revival. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a review. Remember to check out the show notes. In the show notes, you're going to find links to everything that we talked about. You'll find links to the other podcast episodes. And remember that the Patchwork Revival is the podcast celebrating the generational connection that we find in quilting. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.